But these are the books that over the past 4 or 5 years I've read that have stuck with me the most, and the only measure I'm using here when I say stuck with me the most is they're the ones that are about to pop into my mind as I try and think of books that have shaped me as a person. So I'd say the first one, and again this is in no particular order, is a book called Happy by Derren Brown. Now I've definitely spoken about this before on the podcast. Derren is of course the bloke from telly who does the weird mind tricks on people, but he wrote a book a few years back called Happy, which essentially looks at the psychology and the philosophy of happiness and really delves into what truly makes us happy. And as like a headline view of some of the concepts in the book, it's really easy to believe that things like achievements or material possessions or climbing a hierarchy are the things that make us happy. But actually something that I took away from that book is that they're not. It is the most simple things in life. There's an Ed Sheeran lyric from a couple of weeks ago, his new album, where he says, what is it? Ain't it funny how the simplest things in life can make a man? And it's kind of that, right? I think that society has happiness wrong, mainly because there is a financial incentive for companies to promote that buying the next thing, the next iPhone, the next car, the next whatever it is will make you happy. But I really highly recommend reading that book just so that you can have like a foundational safety net when it comes to understanding what really will make you happy, and then you can check your decision making as you go through life against that, right? So if you're unsure as to whether to make a decision, but you understand in proven terms what makes people happy, then you can compare it against that. Similarly, if you're feeling tempted to buy something which is a bit of a stretch for you, you know, it might financially put you out for a few months, but you're convinced that it will make you happy. You're convinced that you just need this one thing and then you'll be happy. I think that having some of the knowledge, and I'd be lying if I said I remember all of the knowledge from that book because I read it years ago, but having some of the knowledge from that book to kind of sanity check yourself against is definitely something that I found useful over the years. I'd say a second one, and it's going to be controversial because there are people who love to hate Jordan Peterson, but Jordan Peterson's book 12 Rules for Life was one that really stuck with me. One of the big takeaways that I took from that I still try and focus on today is the idea of, I think in videos, anecdotally, he calls it like tidy your bedroom before you go and criticize the world. But essentially what he's saying, or at least what I took from this concept, is that it's really easy to feel angry about things. It's really easy to feel like a victim, and it's really easy to point out things that are wrong and injustices, and then just kind of live your life through that paradigm. But the way you make real change is by taking personal responsibility for yourself, for the things around you and for those around you, and making change kind of closer to home, right? So you are in no position to be criticizing anybody or anything for doing something wrong or living in a way that isn't aligned with your beliefs if you can't even tidy your bloody bedroom. Now, of course, the book isn't suggesting that tidying your bedroom is always that in the literal sense. Like tidying your bedroom may be metaphorical for having that conversation with somebody that you've been putting off, that's in the back of your mind, that really causes disorder in your life because it's just not squared off. Maybe tidying your bedroom is finally paying down those debts that you've been accumulating for years and kind of balance transferring and ping-ponging around, and it's there and it's causing you a problem, but you haven't yet addressed it. I think, to me, what I took away from that book as one of the big rules was that you really need to focus inward on how you can improve yourself and what you can fix and what you can control. And yes, by all means, if there is an injustice, point it out. Yes, by all means, if something is wrong in the world, speak on it. I don't think that these things are mutually exclusive, but the idea that so much that we neglect is within our control, and when we take it from within our control and do something about it, that's a really practical way to make positive change in your life, and I think it's something that we all need to remember. A third book, and it's in a similar vein, is Extreme Ownership by Joko Willink. Essentially, that book is, as the title suggests, about taking extreme ownership of everything in your life for very similar reasons, actually, to the previous point that I just spoke about, in as much as there are things in your life that weren't your fault. That's a fact, right? There are things in your life that you can't control. That is a fact. But if you approach every situation, both good and bad, by taking personal responsibility for it. Now, I don't mean, or rather the book doesn't mean making yourself a victim and blaming yourself for everything, but rather looking at a bad situation that you're involved in and asking, for example, what could I have done better or differently to have avoided this situation? or if you're trying to get out of a situation or avoid something that perhaps isn't good for you, even if it's not entirely within your control, probing and asking what can you do about that situation to change it, to move forward, to step away, because there's always something that we can do, right? We might not like the options, but we always have a choice as to which option we choose. A fourth book, of course it's going to be on the list, is The Slight Edge by Jeff Olson. This is probably the one book which has changed my life the most, and it has been, I don't know, 4 or 5 years since I read it. I've never reread it. I probably ought to kind of refresh some of the finer points of the book and some of the nuances, but the main takeaway, as I'm sure you know if you've listened to any episode of this podcast, because I've probably made like 50 people buy this book over the years, is essentially that results in life aren't achieved through great leaps, right? Nothing happens overnight as a result of a single massive action. Actually, all of the worthwhile things in life, whether it is a relationship with somebody, whether it is growing a business or progressing in a career or building a home or starting a family or generating wealth, they're all a result of tiny actions that happen every single day and which compound. And they compound in the same way as compounding interest, right? So if you've ever had a loan or a credit card and you start off with a certain amount, and in month 1 you pay interest on the certain amount, and then in month 2 you pay interest on the certain amount plus last month's interest, and so very quickly that small number can get very big because things multiply in a compounding way. Jeff makes the case that in life the same is true, right? There is this kind of hockey stick curve when it comes to looking at any progress in life, where things start out incredibly slowly, and it's at that point, whether it is in a career or a hobby or finance or anything, people give up. They look at it, they say, I've been going for 7 months on this and nothing's happened. Like, why has nothing happened? This isn't going to work. I'm going to give up. But actually, behind the scenes, the compounding interest has meant that those 7 months haven't gone nowhere. They've been building up this balance, which will double and then double again and then double again. And the idea is that you really ought to just stick at things, probably for longer than you think you should. Like, really stick at things for years and years and make decisions in a really long-term way and commit to doing things consistently. And it is that consistent action over time which is really what generates results. I'm trying to think of a fifth book that really impacted me. Perhaps Lost Connections by Johann. And that might be a weird one if you know what that book's about, because I'm fortunate in as much as I don't think I've ever suffered with anything that comes close to depression or any sort of mental health issue. And yet I would say that one of the top 5 most important self-help books that I've read is about depression and is about mental health issues. So Johann takes a look at studies and analysis and anecdotal stories to kind of pull together this case that the story that he was told about his depression and his mental health issues as a child by his doctor perhaps isn't the full picture. And he essentially says that he was told as a kid that depression was a chemical imbalance in the brain, that something had just kind of gone wrong, and that there's nothing he can really do about it to fix it other than to take a pill. And whilst I believe from memory the book says that, you know, anti-depression medication is good and effective, it's not the only way to relieve yourself of depression. Of course, I'm paraphrasing here, don't take this as medical advice, and obviously go and read the book. And also that there are real world, understandable, practical factors that lead people into depression. And they are things like social isolation and exclusion, like lacking meaning in work, like perhaps not exercising, I don't remember if that's one of them, but basically he outlines this case of the things which through studies and which through stories can be proven to cause one to fall into a state of depression, and therefore through inversion, taking action to make new connections, for example, is a way to kind of relieve yourself of some of the symptoms that come along with that. Really interesting book because, you know, I think we're all prone, we're all susceptible in one way or another to slip into depression at some point in life. From what I understand, there is some are more pre-exposed than others when it comes to depression, but like, it's there for all of us, and it's almost inevitable that at some point in my life I'm going to find myself in a situation where I feel like I'm heading towards that. And so this book, more from a preventative point of view than a read this as medical advice point of view, was just a really interesting one because I think that it has some really practical tips and ones that I held on to.